The glass cage at 30,000 feet. The year was 1944. High above the clouds of occupied Europe, the flying coffin was part of a formation of 100 bombers. But for Sergeant Jack "Stitch" Miller, the war wasn't a formation. It was a 3-foot by 3-foot glass bubble at the very rear of the plane. Jack was the tail gunner. To get into his seat, he had to crawl through the narrow fuselage on his hands and knees. Once he was in, he was locked away from the rest of the crew by a thick bulkhead door. He was the only man on the plane who flew backward, watching the world they had just bombed disappear into the horizon. The stagnant cold life in the tail was a lent, slow torture of the senses. At 30,000 feet, the temperature inside the unheated bubble was minus 40 degrees Celsius. Jack wore a heavy, fleece-lined flight suit with electric heating wires, but the wires often shorted out. The flight to the target took 6 hours. 6 hours of sitting perfectly still in a cramped, kneeling position. You couldn't stand, you couldn't stretch. And if you moved too fast, your oxygen mask might slip, and you'd be unconscious in 30 seconds. "You okay back there, Stitch?" The pilot's voice crackled in his ears, sounding thin and far away. "Still here, Cap," Jack whispered, just watching the clouds grow. The waiting game, the war in the tail, was defined by the Lent watch. For hours, there was nothing but the hypnotic, vibrating hum of the 4 massive engines and the endless expanse of blue. But Jack couldn't look away. He had to scan the 6 o'clock position, the blind spot where the German Messerschmitts loved to hide. His eyes moved in a Lent rhythmic pattern. Left horizon. High center. Right horizon. Low center. If he moved his eyes too fast, he'd miss the tiny black speck that could turn into a deadly fighter in seconds. The silver speck, then, he saw it. A tiny glint of silver against the white glare of the sun. It didn't look like a plane. It looked like a grain of sand on a mirror. "Bandit, 6 o'clock high," Jack said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline hammering in his chest. "He's coming in Lent. He thinks we haven't seen him." The German pilot was playing a game of patience, creeping up into the bomber's slipstream to stay hidden by the tail fin. Jack didn't fire. If he fired too early, he'd waste his ammunition and give away his position. He waited. He watched the silver speck grow into a silhouette, then into a machine. He could see the spinning propeller. He could see the yellow nose of the Focke-Wulf. The heavy metal duel. "Come on, ... just a little closer, ... double quotes," Jack muttered. The German opened fire. Tracer's bright streaks of red light zipped past Jack's glass window, so close he could feel the heat. He gripped the handles of his twin, 50 caliber machine guns. He fired in short, length bursts. He didn't spray the sky. He walked the bullets toward the engine of the fighter. The vibration of the guns shook his entire body, the heavy brass shells clattering against the floor of his cage. A hit. A plume of black smoke erupted from the fighter's wing. The German pilot banked hard, spiraling down toward the patchwork fields of Germany, far below. The long crawl home, the fight had lasted 40 seconds. But the flight home would take another 4 hours. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a crushing Lent fatigue. Jack's knees were numb, and his hands were cramped into the shape of the gun grips. He watched the sun begin to set, turning the vapor trails of the formation into long glowing ribbons of gold and pink. When the plane finally touched down on the grass runway in England, Jack didn't jump out. He had to wait for the ground crew to open the bulkhead. He crawled out of the tail on his hands and knees, his movements stiff and lent, like an old man. He stood on the grass, shaking the blood back into his legs. The waist gunner walked over and slapped him on the shoulder. "Nice shooting, Stitch. That kraut was right on our tail." Jack looked back at his tiny glass bubble. It was covered in a layer of frost and oil. "It's a long way back there," Jack said, his voice raspy from the oxygen. "Everything moves slow when you're the last one in line." The war eventually ended, and the B-17s were melted down for scrap. But for the rest of his life, Jack Miller could never sit with his back to a door. He always wanted to see what was coming, remembering the years he spent in a glass cage, watching the world fade away at 200 miles per hour.